Before we go to the post game, I wanted to take a moment to talk about last night's midterm primary results. And I know, Matt, you were in the control room a little bit yesterday. Um, I mean, what's the kind of flavor? I mean, how were y'all feeling at the end of the night last night?
Well, I mean, anger is my feeling, but I don't want to sort of extrapolate that to the sort of country in general. um, uh, no,
I thought this was going to be an uplifting segment, man.
no,
Matt
sorry, I'm
starts
joking.
with the hate.
No, that's the thing is like, so I'm happy Summer Lee won, happy Fetterman won, and we can
Hmm.
get into like the shades of
Charles
that.
Booker.
Booker too. There's a couple others. Emma texted me. There's one more I actually looked up in Oregon, I think.
Hmm.
And all that's good. But me personally, I'm just pissed about the APAC and
Yeah.
Democrat majority for Israel funding, and so like that's what's really animating me. So like my energy's up, but it really is like that. And the way that they're trying to, Matt Duss put this, a policy advisor for Bernie Sanders put this well, which is like their public sort of facing reason for existence is, hey, we're showing that you can be strong progressives, but being
Hmm.
pro-Israel is the way to be. But they don't mention any of that shit. They lie about the candidates that are actually running, painting them in like different ways. Um, sorry, am I getting? I
No, no,
probably I
no,
don't want
no.
to get.
This is important because this is a big part
Yeah,
of the storyline. Um, I wanted to let me just share this right quick because I think just like
yeah.
this is an anger that's you're like you're not unique in this. This is Mike Siegel, who's run a very good progressive campaign here that was unfortunately unsuccessful. Um, but he tweeted this out last night. APAC loudly bragging about distorting U.S. elections to pursue their narrow nationalist aims is very 2022. Hey, we abused campaign finance laws and flooded airwaves with distorted messages, keeping candidates from discussing crises in healthcare, housing, climate. Aren't we great? I mean, I think that's very fair, especially because you got to remember that, like, you know, it's a problem enough that you have, organizations like this that are basically trying to make it unelectable to say that, hey, we don't think that an apartheid state should be able to kill American journalists. We don't think that an apartheid state that wants to segregate people based on their religion and race um, should be allowed to do that. Hey, we don't think that illegal settlements should continue, even though that the United Nations has found these to be illegal, right? That like if that was like that's what they're putting that into the climate of the
Yes.
politics and all these fights are going on, but also their messaging isn't even just limited to that. They were running campaigns against Fetterman and other people saying this person's not a real Democrat, all the while supporting some of the nastiest January 6th style Republican candidates too, right? It's two-faced bullshit. And I don't think it's wrong to be mad about that at all, Matt.
The not a real Democrat point is perfect. I mean, given the theme of the show, they supported Chantel Brown over Nina Turner because Nina Turner said, yeah, a little bit of truth about the difficulty of voting for corporate Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And They said Chantel Brown is the real Democrat. That's what they told those voters. And what is Chantel Brown doing? She's saying, hey, Joe Biden, she's one of these Democrats saying Joe Biden should not get back into the Iran deal, saying we have concerns and we got to do this, that,
Mm-hmm.
this, that, the other. She's the one who's not supporting the Democrats. And like, yeah, so a couple of North Carolina races. North Carolina's first district, $2.8 million between the APAC group and the other Democrat majority for Israel, DMFI, for Don Davis over Erica Schmidt. Erica voted against the anti-BDS bill in the state. They didn't like that, so here's free speech for you. They ran an ad tying her to MAGA Republicans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
2.3 million for Valerie Foshi over Anita Alam, the first Muslim in North Carolina state office in that's in North Carolina District 4, and then Summer Lee $3.1 million for Steve Irwin against Summer Lee.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about maybe how to think about some of these progressive victories as socialists in a second. But like, let's also just remember the cold reality of American politics is that money does matter in these elections. Even if you're just taking small donor money, it matters for how you're going to run your campaign. And, for example, the Fetterman victory was one of the more expensive Senate races in the country. And I believe in also Pennsylvania history, just that primary race itself. Right. And Fetterman raised a significant amount of money. But think about how much was spent on that primary, where he's now going to go up against a very likely, very well funded GOP candidate, right? You're bleeding Democratic candidates out beforehand, and like, y'all know how I feel about the Democratic Party. I'm not trying to, cry crocodile tears or anything like that. But just on a political level, it's disastrous for these organizations to be pumping so much money into these campaigns that then needs to be challenged from, the people who are being attacked by DMFI and Apac, right? Like, you're basically are weakening your Democratic Party candidates with this money, because the race just becomes so expensive that when they go into the general, they've depleted a large amount of the sums that they were able to raise in the primary, and then people are less likely to donate as the cycle goes on, or et cetera. Because I gave them $100 or whatever. It's a huge waste of money, and at the end of the day, it only supports war, apartheid, and paid consultants who are too fucking well paid.
Yeah,
But maybe
I mean, there you
maybe
go.
let's talk about some of the positive results. Let's start in
Yep.
Kentucky, where Charles Booker is going to go up against Rand Paul. Maybe Charles should get in contact with Rand Paul's neighbor for the best way to land the best knockout blow. But um, I think that's a very exciting campaign. I always like the hood to the holler kind of framing.
Oh, I mean, how could
Yeah.
we be against that?
And Booker's not perfect, and I'm just gonna say this up front because I want to talk about it at the end. I want to lay these people out first and talk about their victories. We do have to be careful about our relations with them, and but also I think that you have to understand that there is a benefit to seeing progressive victories in states like Kentucky and Pennsylvania. But Booker's somebody who's running on Medicare for all. He's somebody who's running on reclaiming the New Deal legacy. I have this quote here from him. Let me just read this right quick. This is from his interview with the Real News Network. We are trying to tell a story with the Kentucky New Deal, trying to help folks to remember the promise and the opportunity that was the New Deal, which created these long-term investments in regular folks. There's also this understanding that in a lot of ways, the promise of a New Deal, which was really about ending poverty, has been undermined for years by politicians like Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, who are really looking to screw us every chance they get and to sell us out to the highest bidder. That's a message that I believe is a winning message.
Mhm.
It's also a message that has a positive program associated with it, because we do need this kind of massive state investment, New Deal style policies to get us out of the current disaster situation that we've been in. If it's climate, if it's poverty, if it's education, like, these are the kinds of visions that we need to be building on. And I think that having somebody, if you're in Kentucky, having somebody like Booker to vote for against somebody as despicable as Rand Paul, that's a very positive thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, who was it against McConnell? Amy McGrath.
Amy McGrath, which was a disaster.
I mean, just like, and what that does is like, just like the political sort of atmosphere is just like no, like there's nothing that carries forward. Yeah, like even if he doesn't beat Rand here, which like, I'd be amazing if he
Mhm.
beats
That would be
Rand Paul,
so
but
good.
at least you're building something with like toward, like you're saying, a public, like a program toward actual things,
I, I,
and
I
not
mean,
some like here's a vet who can like stand like, oh
I'm excited to see Booker versus Rand, just because, Rand is a very unique kind of Republican, at least in the way he presents himself. If you look at his, like, everyone's always like, Rand's a libertarian. Really look at his voting record, and it's not as different as you might expect from your typical mainstream, GOP, Senate senator. Every once in a while he'll make a fuss about military investment, but it's always quite limp. I'll be interested to see how Booker comes up against Rand, just because, you know, when Rand makes these kind of arguments about increasing taxes and coming after a certain kind of lifestyle, I think that Booker putting forward a very strong kind of New Deal oriented politics versus that, I think could be quite compelling. Just because it's different from the kind of limp Democratic thing where they're like, well, actually, I cut taxes when I was in the Kentucky State House, or whatever the fuck they say, right? Like, I think that will be something that will be very beneficial for Booker. And I think even if it's not successful in the long game, I think, is very helpful in just like moving that conversation out of that really tired tax bracket argument that you basically see in most state races across the country.
yeah, I mean that's a good point. Uh, yeah,
Well, let's go over to Pennsylvania just for a second. Summer Lee
okay.
looks like she pulled away with it. That's a huge victory. I'm very happy to see that. I think Summer Lee will be a great addition to the kind of general progressive movement. And Fetterman, everyone's favorite big boy, um, won out. And he didn't just win by a little bit, he won overwhelmingly. Every county
Yes.
in Pennsylvania went for Fetterman. That's despite millions of dollars being pushed against him by TMFI, and all of the
And
kind
Connor
of
Lamb. Connor
Connor
Lamb
Lamb,
that
who's the greatest swamp ghoul you could imagine.
yeah, a little worm.
Yeah, no, I mean, truly, I mean, this is somebody who is like an anti-union consultant kind of character. This is somebody who is through and through was very proud to say, "I'm against progressive policies. I'm against
Yeah.
democratic socialism," and made the race about that. And
Hmm.
I mean, let
In
me
a
just
way
put
that
it.
like makes Fetterman, I thought like look like a little bit better than he actually is. I mean,
That's
I'm excited
exactly what
about
I
him,
was going
but
to
like,
say.
but I'm like, oh my god, he's a socialist, and like, okay, here we go, let's do it. And it's like, well, I mean, he's
And
a good Democrat, I think.
Fetterman is like a notch below. Fetterman is a progressive in the sense of like progressives are very different from socialists, and like we have a
Right.
lot of common goals, at least in the short term, long term, very different ones. But yeah, no, I mean, Matt, you're right. Like the point is like, what lessons can we draw from the Pennsylvania race, right? If they made this race about kind of turning against a Bernie Sanders style, um, democratic socialism or left populism or whatever you want to call it, and Fetterman is the recipient of the yes vote there. That's good for our kind of politics. Fetterman supports Medicare for all. Um, he's somebody who supports unions, drug legalization. Um, people. I will say too, like one thing that's good about Fetterman, he's very strong on nuclear, which I think is something that will add a
Hmm.
lot of good energy. Um, not no pun intended.
Yeah, I was
You
just
know,
gonna
into
say.
into the into the public discourse. People get mad at him because he said some things about fracking and natural gas, and like I think there's a lot of valid criticisms there um, to make, but also like I'm sorry, I think we're gonna do an episode on this soon. Not to cop out here. I think we're
Yeah.
doing an episode on nuclear power and why that's very important for our goals in the future. I think people really need to get educated on that, and I'll own it. Like I remember doing segments on TMBS very much vehemently against nuclear, but the more I've educated myself and talked to people in like the green movement and particularly left socialists, green socialists, I've been very convinced on that. But put that aside for now. I think that Fetterman makes the point that it's like, you have to create power sources, and nuclear is a great option there that are able to provide for us in the future. And you can't just go to systems that are very likely to fail, right? I don't know, call me out on that. But I think that that's actually quite
Well,
responsible. I think we can
look.
question him on some of the things he said on natural gas. I don't think that we need to be pursuing fracking. But the quotations that I've read of him, he's saying like you can't say that you're going to pull out nuclear and then say that you want to get rid of natural gas and fracking because it just doesn't work, especially in the short term. But anyways,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think
Well,
that Fetterman on that has been fairly solid. I guess I would like more Green New Deal kind of politics from him. But again, fuck yeah versus any kind of Republican candidate, and fuck yeah versus any kind of Connor Lamb character.
do you know how the Moneyball system works? That movie with Jonah Hill, and I think Jonah Hill's in
Been a
it. But
bit, yeah.
so basically, the idea is wins above replacement. WAR. It's a big
Hmm.
baseball stat, and the thing is like you just want to do better than what the like the like general what you could expect at that position, right? And
Hmm.
so like Fetterman might not. I mean, I think I agree with you. Like, we need to be a lot more on that. And maybe he won't be better on fracking issues. On all these other issues, it's way better than what you got, right? And
Hmm.
I think like people just need to think about it that way. Uh, uh, and yeah,
But also, just to be clear, I don't want to come off as like a huge Fetterman stan necessarily, but like
right, yeah.
just to be clear on the nuclear on the energy point, this is somebody who's coming from a kind of just transition perspective, where he's saying like we have a lot of jobs in these industries, and we both need to be thinking about what the outcome is going to be for our power production, and two, what it's going to mean for the people who work in those industries. This is somebody who's refused to take, for example, fossil fuel industry money. So a lot of the concerns that he has there, I think, are the kind of political fights that we need to have in any kind of transition, right? Where we're saying to the people who work in those industries, here's the plan to get you all from where you're at to where we want to be in the future. We're not going to just, cut y'all out and leave y'all unemployed, right? Which I think is a big problem with a lot of, uh, green movements, right? Is they just say fuck all the workers in those industries, right? Pennsylvania produces a lot of energy sources, right? And like you need to take seriously how we're going to take care of people who work in those systems now going in the future. That's a just transition, right? So, anyways, I think that where his concerns are coming from, being from like a worker and a working class kind of question, is a positive sign. But you had a graph. Did you want to show that? Yeah. You're muted. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, so this is NBC News asked Democratic voters if they wanted larger scale policies or small scale policies. I'll read it full here. Uh, do you, in thinking of about the Democratic candidates in your state and how they approach issues like healthcare, climate change, college affordability, and economic opportunity, which of the following comes closer to describing the candidate you prefer? One, someone who proposes larger scale policies that cost more and might be harder to pass into law, but could bring major change on the issues. That, I mean, if you can look here, the most recent is that has 63%
Mm-hmm.
versus 33% of someone who proposes smaller scale policies that cost less and might be easier to pass into law, but will bring less change on these issues. So
Mm-hmm.
2 to 1, which way Democrats are at on these issues, and that's why Connor Lamb got the big fat L because I mean he couldn't be more wrong.
Totally, and like that's the real positive note from these victories. I mean, you know, we're very like I think that we interview socialists on this program. We don't really do a lot of political interviews with progressives because we think that there's a difference in our politics and our policies here. And I don't think people should just sort of blindly be lining up behind whatever like hot progressive is running at a time. But I can't sit here and deal with some of the people who aren't seeing the positives that we saw last night, right? Because as we said earlier, the right wing of the Democratic Party tried to make this election about Bernie Sanders, Green New Deal, Democratic Socialist policies, and people said, we want those. We can argue
Yeah,
about the validity of those candidates, and I think that there's certainly serious questions, particularly on Israel, right? Which is amazing, by the way, that like DMFI is pumping all this money against Fetterman, who said he's going to lean in to that stuff. Completely unacceptable answer, in my opinion.
yeah,
Um, but when it comes to what this means for the electorate, what this means for the people who are voting, it means that people are saying we support this kind of bold progressive change. We support these pro worker policies. We support this over status quo Democratic Party policies. That's a good thing. And you should be able to recognize that if we want to have a fruitful future for our kind of politics, that seeing these signals from the electorate is a very, very heartening example, as were the two Bernie Sanders campaigns. It was everybody who was voting for Bernie Sanders a dyed in the wool socialist ready to go for all this shit? No. But it showed that there is a hell of a lot of room to build here and that we should be pursuing it. And from Kentucky to Pennsylvania, we saw the success of that kind of messaging and we saw the preferences. And you should be able to celebrate that and be excited about that. I don't think you should be blind in thinking that we're seeing, this necessarily second, this kind of clandestine socialist movement coming to power. I think that, for example, if Fetterman gets into Senate, we'll be doing segments on this program about him doing bad votes on certain
bad
things.
votes.
I
Yeah,
also think that when we have people who are lining up for Medicare for all, when we have people who are lining up for a higher minimum wage, when we're lining up for people who are against war, when we're lining up for legalization of marijuana, having people who are going to vote yes on that is a good thing. And like you should just like sometimes I think so many people, for example, might have got their Marxist education from like kind of online pugnacious stuff and not from reading Marx. Like when Marx was analyzing politics of countries, he was oftentimes saying like, oh wow, there's this kind of liberal contingent in this country. That's positive, right? He wasn't saying that the policies weren't filled with contradictions. It's fucking Karl Marx, for God's sakes, right?
yeah.
But he recognized that you can see things moving in a certain direction, and then that's positive. And I would just hope that people on our side of things who sort of say that they look at these things with a Marxist analysis can see these kind of exciting things. It's not done, it's not settled, it's not over, but this is a positive kind of reading that we're getting right now that should encourage you to continue the work, especially at a time when a lot of people, I feel like, have gotten very pessimistic about the potential of American politics in the near future, right? These are positive developments. You should be able to celebrate them. Hell, you should be happy and excited. I mean, this is good damn news.
Yeah, and I don't think I the poll we just showed where people want more from the government to be active in making their lives better is, I think, hand in hand with what we're seeing with people deciding, hey, I want to unionize. Like what you're seeing is people
Mm-hmm.
actually putting things together in a way that like has been I mean, tr- entire media apparatuses have been designed to prevent, and it's like fostering both of these things. I think it's really important, and that's the thing is, we got to make sure that Fetterman doesn't, for instance, get in and do something that will upset that. But Fetterman right now is getting hit over his support for the PRO Act, and we
Yeah.
have to have Fetterman's back over that, right? Um, yeah,
And my advice on all this too, like I just get very tired of some of the kind of simplistic worldviews we get from some members of the left. We'll give them that
hmm
today, right?
yeah,
Who are like, well, this candidate's not right, and there's issues with him. That I think is a very, very stale kind of analysis. Because I'll say this again, and I say the same thing about AOC when AOC sort of steps out of line. If you're frustrated with certain people right now who are holding up the banner of the movement, not necessarily being rooted in the movement, the solution is to get to work within the movement to build up our power so that they're lining up behind us, right? That is the solution, not just sort of sitting on the sidelines and saying, well,
yeah.
this isn't like a perfect thing initially, so we're not going to recognize some positive lessons that come out of this kind of stuff. Don't get stupid and starry-eyed and start thinking that, you know what, finally the Democratic Party is going to reform itself and start, being a real lefty organization. Don't be stupid like that, but also don't be stupid in not being able to see that when positive changes are happening, when we're getting good results from the work that has been being done on making ideas like Medicare for all popular, ideas like a higher minimum wage more popular, ideas like a Green New Deal more popular, when we're seeing those results come, even if they're not necessarily lining up in our group's like control, we should see those as a positive thing. And the question then needs to be, how can we get control of those things rather than just sort of sitting on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually, it seems fundamental to maybe Marxism, like people before ideas. Don't be
Mm-hmm.
so idealistic, right? Like your ideas are only so important as the coalition you have behind it.
Totally.
You and whose army?
Totally. Totally. Well, y'all, I appreciate everybody hanging out with us this evening. We got a hell of a lot more. We got Musk, we got Rogan.
We
I
got
think
Joe Rogan's Reddit turning on him.
very
It's
exciting stuff.
it's really beautiful stuff.
And as always, we'll be taking your questions and calls from the Discord. Get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. I'll put that number up one more time, 1940-289-7234. Again, we don't have a welcome message. Matt and I this week will record a very, very sweet and loving welcome message for all of y'all. But right now, there's just a beep and then just start talking, and we'll play that in the post game and see all y'all in just a couple minutes.